We're going to make it about Elliotte Friedman here right now. Fried, how you doing?
I'm good, boys. How are you guys doing?
Family's good. Everyone's healthy. Everyone's fine.
Everyone's good. Yourself? Good.
Yep, the same. And that's really the only important thing here. Go ahead, Timmy.
Healthy and making it through. Listen, I want to get into this the story that broke today, and also give you credit, as we talked about earlier, because I know yesterday you suggested a multiple site return in hockey was the one being talked about the most, and then the Panthers president and CEO also brought it up. And the caveat every time is that this is guesswork, and maybe even a fool's errand. But is that the most likely scenario right now if the NHL gets the go-ahead on the season?
I would say so. I think that, and you're right, I think that's the key thing. Everything we say right now, Tim, is guesswork.
Right.
They did look at the possibility of some neutral sites. Manchester, New Hampshire was one. North Dakota was another. But eventually decided that wasn't going to be able to get done. They just weren't going to have the infrastructure necessary, not only in terms of rinks, but hotels and things like that. So now what they're looking at is 4 sites up to, one for each division. And the names I'd heard that they were looking at, and I hadn't confirmed them, but I'd heard were Edmonton, Raleigh, and Minnesota. And I don't know where the Atlantic one would be. I could see them wanting to do it here in Toronto, just not sure if they could be able to do it there. Although I understand the league is trying to walk that back a little bit and saying that the sites haven't been selected. But I do think that that's kind of what they're looking at. Each team, each division going to one site and seeing if they can finish the regular season and then go into the playoffs. Now, God only knows if this is going to be possible, but that's definitely been discussed.
Fried, I know there's been optimism generally in the league, but hearing things like I've heard today have surprised me a little bit in terms of maybe how far along we are in that optimism. Have you heard anything in the last 24 hours that surprised you?
No, Sid, the one thing that, no, because the thing is, I don't know how anybody could fault the league for saying we have to have a plan. I don't know, nothing is going to happen here if they're not given the okays to do it. If people think that the league is going to do this and they're going to defy orders, that's not happening.
No.
So no. I don't have a problem with them coming up with a plan. I will say this. I think I'm getting the sense that if there's concern about something, it's more about next year than this year. Because I think they understand they're going to have to get through this year if they do it without fans. But I'm not so sure everybody's too excited about the idea of starting next year without fans. So I think that, if anything, I'm wondering, I'm just getting the impression that some teams are kind of nervous about next year and if fans aren't going to be able to go into buildings.
Do you think that there are teams that economically could not handle that, Elliotte?
Honestly, Tim, I don't know the answer at this point in time. I think it would hurt. Yeah. I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, look, one of the things we talked about yesterday is that I think the AHL is very concerned about a season next year without fans. And if there's no fans next year, what's that going to mean for them? And I got to think that there's a whole lot of leagues looking at that. Look, you guys follow college sports. Look what's going on there. The guy from the University of Connecticut dropped a hint yesterday that maybe no fall sports of any kind. I saw that there was a commissioner of one conference today somewhere out west, I think, said that if the students aren't back, as a whole, not just the teams, no fall sports. So I think everybody is asking themselves now, what what it's going to look like if there's no fans. So, the NHL's got a larger TV deal than most leagues. It's not obviously at the level of the NBA or the NFL or MLB, but it has, a substantial TV deal. I think they'd be better positioned than a lot of other places to handle it. But what is ticket revenue in this league? What is it, 45% of the revenues maybe? It's a big chunk. Will cause a problem for sure.
Elliotte Friedman here on Tim and Sid. Friedge, the comments from the Florida Panthers president today during a conference call in Florida you wrote what you wrote last night, and then he made the comments today about having sites host games specifically. Did he speak out of turn here? Did that ruffle a few feathers in New York?
I can't imagine the league was too thrilled about that.
Like slap on the wrist kind of stuff, or like overly mad? Like Gary's levels of anger better than are me.
But if you look at the format that he did it in, he did it on what is it, like a state of Florida economic conference call or something like that?
Like a reopening conference call and how they're going to do it. I didn't know they even closed, to be honest with you, based on what I've seen.
Well, that's the thing. Like look at the vehicle, right? Like Florida is a state that's pretty much saying, "Hey, you want to go to the beach? Go to the beach." So you can imagine that, what the environment is there. So when I heard it was on like a state of Florida reopening call, I wasn't surprised. I'm sure the league wasn't thrilled with it. I haven't asked anybody. I'm sure the league's not thrilled about it. But I guess when you consider where he announced it, it kind of makes sense that would kind of be the attitude. Like, I think he has an idea, but the league is like, I think one thing the league would not like there, Sid, is saying, absolutely, we're playing in July, because nobody knows. Do I think they'd like to start, or, like maybe even on something like Independence Day in the States? I'm sure they absolutely would love to if they're not playing by then already, but there's no guarantees.
Elliotte Friedman joining us here on Tim and Sid. One of the parts of the In Conversation with Ron MacLean that we have already seen or heard from Gary Bettman was that the players would require a 3-week training camp to get things going again. Is that something you've heard from the PA and how they would want to come back?
I think it's about 3 weeks, yes. 3 weeks to a month. I'll tell you, like, I will say this, Tim. Some of the concerns I've heard from players have been, I think, I don't think, like, in Sweden they're skating. I think there's some players who think their teams would be at a competitive disadvantage. For example, say if you're in New York right now, you're not going to be skating anytime soon. But if you're in some areas that have been less affected, you could be skating. I think some teams are a little concerned about players having a competitive advantage. I've had a couple players tell me they don't like the optics of if like one player sent me a link to that story about the PGA using 1 million tests to play golf, and he said he doesn't want to be a part of that. Like if the NHL players are getting tests that are not available to other people. Like there was one player who sent me and said, I don't want a part of that. And a second player said to me he agreed with that. Now, I don't know. We don't know where this is going to be in 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, whatever. But I did have a couple of people say to me that they didn't like the optics of that.
And the PGA walked back that report pretty quickly. Just for
I didn't see that.
They did.
Somebody sent me the link to it and said I don't want to be like that in the NHL.
For optics too, they walked it back. They knew what happened.
Completely. No, it was 100% optics. Yeah, it was 100% optics. Friedge, in terms of and again, I hate doing this because it's speculation and we don't know, and I get it. The cities mentioned, they make sense to you?
Well, one of the things I did was I checked the data, right? And someone said to me, like, you also have to check the projections, which I didn't look at as much. But I looked at the current data. Edmonton makes a lot of – the only reason I was surprised about Edmonton was I kind of thought the league might want that all in one country. But if you look, Alberta's generally, knock on wood, in a good position, and Edmonton has the infrastructure to do it. Minnesota, again, knock on wood, looks pretty healthy, all things considered, and definitely has the infrastructure to do it. Raleigh, I kind of got it when I looked at the map. Like Carolina's in division with Florida, and is anyone going to gamble on Florida? They've got 3 New York teams, and we all know what they're going through. Sorry, Carolina's not with Florida. Excuse me. Carolina's with the New York teams, with the Pennsylvania teams, Ohio, and also Maryland. Yes, yeah. Or Baltimore, Washington D.C., and all of those areas. Right now, they're still pretty red. So I know that there were some teams who said to me they worried that would Raleigh be able to handle 8 teams. But, I mean, in terms of where it stands right now, they're probably the safest looking area, although someone told me somewhere in North Carolina had a spike yesterday. I just don't know enough about it to say for sure.
Right. And all of us don't know enough about it to say for sure. Elliotte Friedman joining us here.
I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. Just so you guys know.
Atta boy.
Hey-o.
I mean,
Give it a little something for that.
The draft, and listen, I know we don't have a ton of time here, and I'm opening a completely other can of worms, but the draft is such an interesting beast for me and the NHL because we're seeing how much interest is being drawn to the NFL draft at the end of the week. Is there a chance, Elliotte Friedman, that we have a draft and then continue the 2019-2020 season?
Yes, I like I think the league wants to do it.
How?
I think the league wants to do it. And someone even suggested to me that the league's got some curveballs there that would be very interesting for TV and media.
But if you're the Sens, and you got a 25% chance with the Sharks pick to win this thing, like you can do this without finishing out the regular season?
I think you'd have to. I mean, I'd be curious to see, apparently there's one GM on the call yesterday who freaked out, and there were a few that didn't. But they felt the same way. Like, there's going to be some pushback on this, and there are some GMs who really hate it. But if the league decides it wants to do it, they might run it through. I mean, I think there's a lot of questions here. Like, for example, Vancouver, their second-round pick, which I think right now would be 43rd overall, they have to give it to L.A. if they re-sign Tyler Toffoli. Well, we're not going to know at the draft if they're going to sign Tyler Toffoli or not, probably. Right. So that, and Vancouver's first rounder that could go to New Jersey, how's that all going to work? And apparently, I don't even know. Someone told me it might have been actually an owner who said it. But when it was brought up on the owner's call, the board of governors call, he said, "Are we going to have a team win the lottery and then win the Stanley Cup?" So, I mean, it's amazing. Now, but I will say this: I've had guys tell me the league really wants to do this. It doesn't want to jam in a draft in an off season. It's seeing all the attention the NFL draft is getting, even more than normal. And someone said to me there might be a couple curveballs there that are good for TV. I mean, we'll see. But I get the sense the league really wants to do this. And while a lot of GMs don't, I think the question is who's going to have the power here.
Frege, loaded segment today. Yeah. Like, usually we mess around a little bit. And, hey, how's your haircut? I feel like I could have gone 3 hours here.
By the way, I got to tell you guys, Mike, this is right up your alley. But, Mike Curtis, the linebacker from the Colts who died earlier this week. I was watching some of his old videos from, the late 60s, early 70s. You guys have to watch this. The way he, these tackles, he basically leads with a right hook. You guys would appreciate this. It is totally foreign to us now. I was
So, Freed,
laughing as I watched these highlights today.
You're saying you watched a guy cheap shotting on the regular and said Tim and Sid would love this. That's what you said?
That's totally what I thought about. Like, these guys will appreciate this.
Yeah. My Alex Karras, Chuck Cecil life will be relived because
But in those days, it was not a cheap shot. That's just the way it was.
Yeah, that's the way it was. And Alex Karras kick his own brother. That's the NFL film story.
Did he kick his own brother?
He studded his own brother, yeah.
I'm going down the rabbit hole on this one. Thanks, Tim and Friedge, for that. There goes 3 hours of my life. Friedge, thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
Take care, guys.
Elliotte Friedman, Hockey Night in Canada, Sportsnet.ca. By the way, if you have time, go back and read his stories from the last couple days, because all of this is intertwined, including all of the crazy ideas that you would have to sort out before you went to a draft. And if you just heard him, it sounds like they're going to have a draft before they have whatever the rest of the season might look like.
I don't know if you believe me when I say this, Tim. That, of all the things I've heard, is one of the wilder ones. Structuring a draft without the regular season ending and with the season continuing after the draft. That one's a new one.
They're going to do it because of the WNBA and the NFL.